The air in the grand ballroom was thick with the scent of money and ambition, a perfume Ethan Hayes had worn his entire life. He stood at the center of it all, a king in his castle, until he saw her. A ghost from a life he'd long since buried. Clara, his ex-wife, the woman his family had dismissed as wallpaper, now floated across the marble floor in a gown the color of midnight, her hand resting on the arm of Sebastian Croft, a man whose net worth could purchase Ethan's entire legacy 10 times over. And in that moment, Ethan's perfectly curated world began to shatter. The annual St. Jude's Foundation Gala was the apex of the Chicago social season, a glittering affair where old money and new tech collided under the weight of $1,000-a-plate charity. Ethan Hayes moved through the crowd with an easy, practiced grace, his hand resting possessively on the small of his girlfriend's back. A smile was fixed on his face, the kind that didn't quite reach his eyes but was perfect for press photos. He was a Hayes, after all, and their public image was as meticulously managed as their stock portfolio. His mother, Margaret, was holding court near the silent auction, her silver hair a beacon of aristocratic judgment. Everything was as it should be, and then the world tilted on its axis. The grand doors of the Drake Hotel's ballroom swung open, and a hush fell over the room, a ripple of collective awe that Ethan felt in his bones before he even saw the cause. A woman stood silhouetted against the light of the hallway, a vision in a sapphire silk gown that clung to her figure like a second skin. Her dark hair was swept up in an elegant chignon, revealing the graceful line of her neck and a constellation of diamonds that glittered with every subtle movement. But it wasn't the dress or the diamonds that made Ethan's breath catch in his throat. It was her face. It was Clara. His Clara. No, not his. Not for a long, long time. The woman he saw now was a stranger sculpted from familiar clay. The quiet, accommodating girl he had married and his family had systematically erased was gone. In her place was a woman of unnerving poise and confidence. Her eyes, once perpetually downcast, now scanned the room with a cool, appraising gaze. The hesitant smile he remembered was replaced by a serene, almost challenging curve of her lips. Beside her, his hand resting lightly on her arm, was Sebastian Croft. The Sebastian Croft, a titan of industry, a recluse who rarely graced these events, a man whose name was whispered in boardrooms with a mixture of fear and reverence. His presence was a gravitational force, pulling the attention of every power player in the room, and he was looking at Clara not as an accessory, but as the center of his universe. Ethan felt a cold dread snake up his spine. He could feel the whispers start, the furtive glances in his direction. He was suddenly aware of his girlfriend, Tiffany, chattering beside him, her words dissolving into meaningless noise. His mother's sharp gaze found his from across the room, her perfectly arched eyebrows knitting together in a rare display of confusion. "Ethan, darling, are you all right? You look like you've seen a ghost," Tiffany said, her voice grating on his raw nerves. He couldn't answer. He was mesmerized, watching Clara and Sebastian move into the room. They didn't walk, they glided. People parted for them, drawn to their aura of power. Sebastian bent his head to murmur something in Clara's ear, and she laughed. It was a sound Ethan had forgotten, a low, melodic chime that now sent a shard of ice through his heart. He realized with a sickening jolt that he hadn't heard her laugh like that in years, not even in the beginning. His mind reeled, trying to reconcile the image before him with the woman he had let walk out of his life 5 years ago with a single suitcase and a check he'd considered generous. The Clara he knew was a mouse, a lovely, timid creature who arranged his flowers, organized his social calendar, and absorbed his family's endless slights with a quiet, heartbreaking resilience. She was the background to his life, the comfortable, predictable wallpaper he hadn't truly noticed until it was stripped away. And now, this. This was not wallpaper. This was a masterpiece, unveiled for the world to see, and he felt a primal, illogical surge of possession. How? How had the girl who was too shy to speak at his family's dinner parties become this formidable woman on the arm of a billionaire? Where had this confidence, this elegance, this power come from? As if sensing his stare, Clara's gaze swept across the room and locked with his. For a heartbeat, the universe seemed to hold its breath. Her serene expression didn't falter, but he saw a flicker in the depths of her dark eyes, a spark of something he couldn't name. It wasn't hatred or sadness or even recognition. It was something far more chilling, indifference. It was the look you give a stranger, a piece of furniture, a part of the scenery you have no interest in. In that single, dismissive glance, Ethan Hayes, the man who had everything, felt a profound and terrifying sense of loss. He had not just lost a wife he'd never valued. He had lost a story he never bothered to read. And now he was seeing the stunning final chapter, realizing with horror that he was nothing more than a footnote in the preface. The ghost he was seeing wasn't just Clara. It was the ghost of the man he could have been and the life he had so carelessly thrown away. The memory haunted Ethan now, rising unbidden like smoke from the ashes of his past. It was their third Christmas as a married couple, and the Hayes family had gathered at the sprawling ancestral home in Lake Forest. The air was thick with the scent of pine needles and his mother's expensive perfume. Clara, then only 24, had spent a week meticulously planning her contribution to the family's potluck-style Christmas Eve dinner, a tradition Margaret Hayes insisted upon to maintain a facade of humility. Clara had decided on a beef Wellington, a complex, ambitious dish she'd practiced for weeks. Ethan remembered her in their city apartment kitchen, her brow furrowed in concentration, flour dusting her cheek. She was so desperate to impress them, so eager to finally carve out a small space for herself within the impenetrable fortress of the Hayes clan. She had even purchased a new dress for the occasion, a simple but elegant forest green velvet that brought out the warmth in her eyes. When they arrived, the condescension began immediately. His Aunt Carol, a woman with a face perpetually pinched in disapproval, eyed the ornate pastry. "Oh, how ambitious, dear. Let's hope it's not too dry. Ethan needs his food just so." Clara's smile tightened, but she placed it on the sideboard with the other dishes. Later, during dinner, Ethan watched as his family heaped their plates with the caterer-provided turkey and the ham his mother had ordered from a specialty shop. Clara's beef Wellington sat largely untouched. He saw the flicker of hurt in her eyes as his father, a man of few words and even fewer compliments, cut a small piece, chewed it thoughtfully, and then declared, "A bit rich for my blood." No one else tried it. Ethan, caught between a lifetime of placating his family and the silent plea in his wife's eyes, did nothing. He said nothing. He ate the turkey. He remembered the exact moment he made the choice, a small, cowardly betrayal that felt insignificant at the time, but now loomed large in his memory. He saw Clara trying to engage his cousin in conversation, only to be spoken over. He saw her offering to help his mother in the kitchen, only to be waved away with a dismissive, "Oh, the staff will handle it, dear. You just sit." The final crushing blow came during the gift exchange. Clara had spent months searching for the perfect presents. A rare first-edition book for his father, a history buff. A vintage silk scarf from a Parisian boutique for his mother. She had put so much thought, so much of her limited allowance, into each gift. His family opened them with polite, lukewarm smiles before turning their attention to the more extravagant offerings. In return, they had all chipped in to get her a single gift, a high-end vacuum cleaner. "We just noticed you're so domestic," his mother had said, her smile a razor blade cloaked in velvet. "We thought it would be useful for you." The room had filled with a tense silence. It was a joke, but it wasn't. It was a statement. It was a branding iron, marking her as the help, the outsider, the girl who would never truly belong. Ethan saw the color drain from Clara's face. He saw the fight she was having with herself, the battle to keep the tears at bay, to maintain her composure in a room full of people who saw her as nothing more than an accessory to their son. And again he did nothing. He laughed along, a hollow, shallow sound. He told her later, in the car on the way home, that it was just his mother's way. He told her not to be so sensitive. He didn't see the single tear that slipped down her cheek in the darkness of the car. He didn't understand that with every slice of untouched beef Wellington, every dismissive comment, every thoughtless gift, they were carving away pieces of her soul. Their marriage hadn't ended in a fiery explosion. It had died a slow, quiet death by 1,000 cuts. He had been so immersed in his own world, the world of Hayes Industries, of boardrooms and business trips, that he hadn't noticed she was suffocating. He saw her as a constant, a given, the steady, reliable presence that managed his home, soothed his ego, and asked for so little in return. Her needs were whispers in the roaring wind of his ambition. He remembered their final conversation. It wasn't a fight. She had packed a single bag. She sat him down in their pristine living room, the one she had decorated but never seemed to truly inhabit. Her voice was calm, devoid of the emotion he had expected. "I can't do this anymore, Ethan," she'd said, her hands folded neatly in her lap. "Do what? What's wrong? Is it my mother? I'll talk to her." The offer was empty, and they both knew it. She shook her head, a sad, knowing smile on her face. "It's not just her. It's me. I don't know who I am anymore. I look in the mirror, and I see a ghost, a faint outline of a person. I need to find out if there's anything real left underneath." He had tried to argue, to offer solutions, a vacation, a new car, a bigger allowance. He treated it like a business negotiation, a problem to be solved with money. He didn't understand that she was talking about her very existence. He couldn't comprehend that the quiet, compliant woman he had married had found a core of steel within her, forged in the fires of his family's indifference and his own neglect. When she walked out the door, he felt a brief pang of annoyance, of inconvenience. He never imagined it was the last time he would see her as a broken thing. The ash of that past was now coating his tongue, bitter and choking, as he stood in the ballroom watching the phoenix who had risen from it. The first 6 months after leaving Ethan were a brutal, monochrome existence. The generous check he'd given her, the one meant to assuage his guilt and keep her quiet, sat untouched in a new bank account she opened with her maiden name, Clara Stevens. She was determined not to use a single cent of it. That money was tainted with pity and dismissal. Using it would feel like an admission that she couldn't survive without him. She rented a small one-bedroom apartment in Wicker Park, a world away from the opulent Lincoln Park mansion she'd left behind. The anonymity was both terrifying and liberating. For the first time in years, no one knew her as Ethan Hayes's wife. No one had any expectations of her. She was just Clara, a woman trying to figure out how to pay her next utility bill. She had a degree in art history, a passion that the Hayes family had deemed a lovely little hobby. It was hardly a marketable skill in a competitive job market. She took a job at a small art gallery, a position she was wildly overqualified for, but it paid the rent. She was the one who answered the phones, managed the inventory, and served cheap white wine at openings. It was humbling, soul-crushing work at times. She endured condescending patrons and the pitying looks of her boss, who knew just enough about her past to treat her like a fragile, tragic figure. But in the quiet moments, surrounded by art, she felt a flicker of the person she used to be. She would lose herself in the brushstrokes of a painting, in the bold lines of a sculpture, and remember the girl who had dreams before they were suffocated by the Hayes name. It was during one of these gallery openings, about a year into her new life, that she met Sebastian Croft. He hadn't come for the art. He was there to meet a client, and the gallery was simply a neutral, public space. He was a commanding presence, dressed in a bespoke suit that probably cost more than her car, but it was his eyes that caught her attention. They were intelligent, observant, and missed nothing. She was in the back, struggling to open a case of wine, when he appeared. "Let me help you with that," he said, his voice a low baritone. He took the box cutter from her hand and sliced through the tape with an effortless precision. "Thank you," she said, flustered. "You seem to know your way around this collection," he observed, gesturing to the paintings on the wall. "The artist is talented but lacks discipline. His composition is derivative of Richter but without the emotional depth." Clara was taken aback. No one ever talked to her about the art. "I agree," she found herself saying, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "He's technically proficient, but there's no soul. It's imitation, not inspiration." A flicker of genuine interest crossed Sebastian's face. "You have a good eye." They spent the next 20 minutes locked in a deep, engaging conversation about art, a conversation more intellectually stimulating than any she'd had in 5 years of marriage. He didn't ask her who she was or what she did. He just listened to her ideas. At the end of the night, he handed her his card. "I run an investment firm," he said. "Croft Ventures. We have a small but growing division that invests in emerging artists and art tech startups. I think you'd be an asset. Call my office tomorrow." Clara was stunned. She thought it was a line, a polite dismissal, but something in his direct, no-nonsense gaze told her it was a genuine offer. The next day, on a whim, she called. She was put through to him immediately. He offered her a job as a junior analyst in his art investment division. The pay was more than double what she was making at the gallery. It was the lifeline she didn't know she was searching for. Working for Sebastian was demanding. He was a ruthless businessman, but he was also a brilliant mentor. He saw the sharp, analytical mind that had been buried under years of social niceties. He pushed her, challenged her, and never once treated her as fragile. He gave her projects that forced her to grow, to learn the language of finance, of acquisitions and market trends. She devoured it all. She worked harder than she ever had in her life, fueled by a desperate need to prove not just to him, but to herself, that she was more than a pretty face who could arrange flowers. She discovered she had a talent for it. Her art history background gave her a unique ability to spot talent, to see the potential in an unknown artist before they hit the mainstream. Her quiet, observant nature made her a shrewd negotiator. She was building something, a career, a reputation, a new identity forged in her own fire. Her relationship with Sebastian evolved slowly, organically. It started with late nights working in the office, fueled by coffee and a shared passion for their work. It grew into dinners where they debated market strategies and art theory. He was the first person who saw her, the intelligent, capable woman she was fighting to become. He wasn't saving a damsel in distress. He was investing in a high-potential asset, and the return was more than he could have imagined. The romance came later, a quiet understanding that blossomed between two people who respected each other's minds as much as their hearts. He knew about Ethan. She had told him everything, not as a sob story, but as a statement of fact, a history she had overcome. He listened without judgment, his jaw tight with a quiet anger on her behalf. One evening, standing on the balcony of his penthouse overlooking the city, he had taken her hand. "The past is a lesson, not a life sentence, Clara," he'd said, his thumb stroking her knuckles. "You've built this new life yourself. I just opened a door. You were the one brave enough to walk through it." And she knew he was right. Standing in the ballroom at the St. Jude's Gala, with Sebastian's steady presence beside her, she wasn't hiding behind his power or his wealth. She was standing on a foundation she had built from the ground up. One grueling day, one smart decision, one hard-won victory at a time. She was the architect of her own life, and she was finally ready to survey her creation. The days following the gala were a slow-motion nightmare for Ethan. Clara's image was seared into his mind. Her cool indifference, the proprietary way Sebastian Croft's hand rested on her arm, the collective gasp of a room that had once considered her invisible. He couldn't sleep. He couldn't focus. During a crucial board meeting about a potential merger, he found himself staring out the window, replaying that one dismissive glance over and over. His world, once so solid and predictable, now felt like quicksand. He snapped at his assistant, was curt with his girlfriend, and avoided his mother's calls, knowing they would be filled with a venomous curiosity he didn't have the energy to face. He was consumed. He did what he always did when faced with a problem he couldn't solve. He threw money and resources at it. He hired a private investigator, a discreet man named Peterson who specialized in sensitive corporate and personal inquiries. The request felt shameful, a violation of a past he had no right to anymore, but the need to know was a gnawing hunger that overshadowed his pride. "I want to know everything," Ethan told Peterson in his sterile corner office overlooking the Chicago River. "How she met him, what she does for him, everything." The first report came back within 48 hours, and it was a gut punch. Peterson had compiled a detailed dossier on Clara Stevens. The name itself was a small sting. She had shed his name like a skin she no longer wanted. The report detailed her professional rise within Croft Ventures. It spoke of her uncanny eye for talent and her reputation as a formidable negotiator. It included quotes from art world publications that praised her recent acquisitions for the Croft collection, calling her one of the most influential new players in the contemporary art market. This wasn't a woman being kept by a billionaire. This was a woman who had built an empire alongside him. Ethan read the words: asset, influential, formidable, and they didn't compute. They were describing a stranger. How had he missed this? How could a person with this much potential have lived in his house, slept in his bed, without him ever seeing a hint of it? The realization was a cold, creeping horror. He hadn't just ignored her. He had been blind. He had looked at her and seen only what he wanted to see, what his family wanted him to see. A beautiful, placid, and ultimately unimportant addition to his life. His interactions with his family became strained. His mother, Margaret, finally cornered him at their regular Sunday brunch. "I cannot believe the audacity of that girl," she began, her fork clicking against her plate. "To show up like that, flaunting that man, it's utterly tasteless. What does a man like Sebastian Croft even see in her?" The question hung in the air, and for the first time, Ethan heard the desperate insecurity beneath his mother's bluster. She wasn't just insulting Clara, she was trying to reinforce her own worldview, a world where people stayed in the neat little boxes she assigned them. "Maybe he sees what we never bothered to look for," Ethan said, the words tasting like acid. Margaret's eyes widened in shock. "What is that supposed to mean? We gave her everything, a beautiful home, a place in society." "We gave her a cage, Mother," Ethan shot back, his voice rising. "A beautiful gilded cage. We treated her like a pet, not a partner. That vacuum cleaner at Christmas? Did you have any idea how cruel that was?" The memory, once so distant, was now vivid and shameful. He saw the scene through Clara's eyes, the forced smile, the public humiliation. His mother was momentarily speechless, a rare occurrence. She saw the rebellion in her son's eyes, the first cracks in the perfect facade of the heir she had so carefully molded. The unraveling continued at home. Tiffany, his girlfriend, was a carbon copy of what his mother thought he needed. Beautiful, socially adept, and utterly uncomplicated. But now her cheerful, surface-level conversations felt gratingly empty. Her talk of parties and shopping and gossip seemed trivial, infantile, compared to the woman he now knew Clara had become. One evening, as Tiffany was showing him a new pair of diamond earrings she'd bought, he found himself staring at her, a strange sense of detachment washing over him. "Were you ever passionate about anything, Tiff?" he asked abruptly. "Besides this?" He gestured vaguely at the opulent room, the glittering jewelry. She looked at him, confused. "What do you mean, I'm passionate about us?" The answer, which once would have satisfied him, now felt hollow. He realized he didn't know the first thing about the woman he was dating, and he didn't care to learn. He had been living a life of curated surfaces, and Clara's return had smashed the mirror, forcing him to see the profound emptiness behind it. He was surrounded by wealth, by beauty, by success, but he was utterly, terrifyingly alone. The power he had always taken for granted, the power of his name and his money, felt like a useless weapon against the quiet strength of a woman he had thrown away. He had been the king of a hollow kingdom, and he was only just beginning to understand the true cost of his crown. It took Ethan a week to build up the courage to reach out. Every draft of the text message he wrote sounded either pathetic or demanding. He finally settled on something simple, something that feigned a professionalism he was far from feeling. "Clara, it's Ethan. I was surprised to see you at the gala. I was hoping we could talk. There are some loose ends from the old endowment fund we started that I'd like to discuss." It was a lie, a flimsy pretext, and he knew she would see right through it. But it was the only way he could frame the request without admitting the truth, that he was haunted by her and desperate for answers. Her reply came 2 hours later, cool and concise. "Ethan, a conversation is fine. My assistant will be in touch to schedule a time." He felt a strange mix of relief and humiliation. She was treating him like a business associate, a minor appointment to be slotted into her busy calendar. The power dynamic had not just shifted, it had been completely inverted. Her assistant scheduled the meeting for the following Tuesday at 3 o'clock. The location she chose was the cafe at the Art Institute of Chicago. It was a masterstroke of strategy on her part. It was public, yet discreet. And it was her territory, a place where she was the expert and he was the novice. When he arrived, she was already there, sitting at a small table overlooking the museum's serene south garden. She was wearing a simple, tailored, cream-colored dress, her hair pulled back, her face framed by minimalist gold earrings. She looked elegant, professional, and completely untouchable. She was sipping an espresso, a notebook and pen resting on the table beside her. She wasn't waiting for him. She was working while she waited. "Ethan," she said, her voice even as he approached. She didn't stand up. "Thank you for coming." "Clara," he managed, his own voice sounding rough to his ears, "you look well." It was the most inadequate word he could have chosen. She didn't look well. She looked magnificent. "I am," she replied, her gaze direct, unwavering. There was no trace of the nervous, deferential woman who used to shrink under his gaze. "You mentioned the endowment fund?" He flinched at the directness of her question, the way she immediately dispensed with pleasantries and cut to his fabricated agenda. "Right, the fund. It was just some paperwork." He let the lie die on his lips. It was pointless. "There is no paperwork, Ethan," she said, not unkindly, but with a finality that left no room for argument. "Our lawyers dissolved that trust 4 years ago. Why did you want to see me?" Stripped of his pretense, he felt a wave of raw, unfamiliar vulnerability. He sat down, his movements stiff. I don't know," he admitted, the honesty feeling foreign on his tongue. "I was shocked to see you. I needed to understand." "Understand what?" she asked, her voice a calm, curious whisper. "What is it you think you're owed an understanding of?" The question was a surgeon's scalpel, cutting away his ego and exposing the entitlement beneath. He had always believed he was owed an explanation, a place in her story. "How did this happen?" he finally asked, gesturing vaguely. "You and Sebastian Croft, your work, everything." Clara took a slow sip of her espresso, her eyes never leaving his. "It happened because I left, Ethan. It happened because for the first time in my life, I was forced to rely on myself. I didn't have the Hayes name to hide behind or be crushed by. I had to build something of my own, or I would have disappeared entirely." There was no bitterness in her voice, only a profound, unshakable clarity. "You and your family," she continued, "you saw me as a project. A girl from a modest background who needed to be polished, to be molded into the perfect corporate wife. You never once stopped to ask who I was or what I wanted. You just assumed I wanted what you had." Every word was true, and the truth was a physical blow. He had been so proud of giving her a better life, never realizing he was stealing her own. "I didn't see it," he whispered, the admission costing him more than any failed business deal ever had. "I was a fool." "No," she said, shaking her head slowly. "You weren't a fool. You were a product of your environment. You were a haze. And being a haze means you never have to look too closely at the people you consider beneath you. It's a privilege you're born with." She paused, her gaze softening for just a moment. "The real tragedy, Ethan, is that you were never interested in who I was. You were interested in the idea of me, the quiet, supportive wife who would make your life easier. And when I stopped being easy, I stopped being useful." He wanted to argue, to defend himself, but he couldn't. She had dissected their entire marriage with a precision that was both brilliant and devastating. He had no defense. "Is he good to you?" he asked, the question feeling small and petty, but he needed to know. A genuine smile finally touched her lips. "Sebastian doesn't see me as an extension of himself," she said. "He sees me as a partner. He challenges me. He respects me, and he celebrates my successes as if they were his own. He's good to me because he sees me, all of me." It was the final, crushing blow. That was what he had failed to do. He had never truly seen her. He had looked, but he had never seen. She glanced at her watch. "I have a meeting at 4, she said, gathering her things. There was no malice in her dismissal, just the practicality of a busy woman with a schedule to keep. As she stood to leave, he felt a surge of desperation. "Clara, wait. I'm sorry." She paused and looked down at him, her expression unreadable. "I know, Ethan," she said softly, "but you're not sorry for what you did to me. You're sorry for what you lost. There's a difference." And with that, she turned and walked away, leaving him alone at the table, surrounded by masterpieces he couldn't see, the echo of her words branding themselves onto his soul. She hadn't come for revenge. She had come for something far more powerful, to show him the truth, and then to leave him with it. Life with Sebastian was a world away from her life with Ethan. It was a partnership forged in the crucible of ambition and mutual respect. Their evenings were spent not at stuffy society dinners, but in their shared home office, poring over auction catalogues, or in deep debate over the merits of a new artist they were considering for the Croft collection. Sebastian valued her opinion, sought her counsel, and treated her success as integral to his own. For the first time, Clara felt like an equal, a true partner. But even in this seemingly perfect world, she began to notice subtle, disquieting cracks. Sebastian was a man who craved control. It was what made him a brilliant businessman, able to anticipate market shifts and orchestrate complex, multi-billion-dollar deals with a chess master's foresight. But this need for control sometimes bled into their personal life in ways that pricked at Clara's newfound independence. It started small. He would override her choice of restaurant for dinner, insisting he knew a better place. He'd surprise her with a weekend trip, leaving no room for her to object, framing his unilateral decision-making as a romantic gesture. She tried to dismiss it as him being protective, a stark contrast to Ethan's neglect. But a persistent, uneasy feeling began to take root. The first major fissure appeared during a deal involving a small independent art gallery in Pilsen, a vibrant, predominantly Hispanic neighborhood in Chicago. The gallery, Galleria Sombra, was a community hub, a place that nurtured local, emerging Latino artists who were often ignored by the mainstream art world. Clara had discovered it on her own, spending weekends visiting smaller venues, and had fallen in love with its raw, authentic energy. She saw immense, untapped potential. She proposed an acquisition to Sebastian, not a hostile takeover, but a partnership. Croft Ventures would provide funding, resources, and a global platform, while the gallery's founder, a passionate woman named Elena, would retain creative control. It was a perfect blend of their corporate mission and Clara's desire to support authentic, diverse voices. Sebastian initially loved the idea, but as they got deeper into the negotiations, his controlling nature began to surface. He wanted to rebrand the gallery, change its name to Croft Annex Pilsen. He wanted to install his own director, arguing that Elena lacked the corporate experience to manage their investment properly. "We need to protect our interests, Clara," he argued one night, standing before the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse. The city lights glittered below them like a conquered territory. "Passion doesn't guarantee profit. We need structure. We need our people on the inside." "You're missing the point, Sebastian," Clara countered, her voice firm. "The gallery's magic is Elena. It's the community trust she's built. If you sanitize it, if you turn it into another corporate outpost, you'll kill the very thing we're trying to invest in. It will lose its soul." "Souls don't show up on a balance sheet," he retorted, his tone sharper than she'd ever heard it. "This is business." The argument escalated, their first real fight. It wasn't about the gallery anymore. It was about control. Clara realized that Sebastian, for all his support, still saw her vision as something to be managed, to be molded to fit his own rigid framework. He had helped her build her wings, but now he was subtly trying to direct her flight path. A few days later, she discovered he had gone behind her back. He had sent one of his lawyers to speak with Elena directly, presenting a revised, more aggressive offer that sidelined her and essentially demoted her to a curatorial consultant in her own gallery. Elena, feeling bullied and betrayed, called Clara, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and hurt. The sense of betrayal was sharp and sickeningly familiar. Clara confronted Sebastian, her heart pounding with a cold fury. "You went behind my back," she said, her voice low and steady. "You used my idea, my connection with Elena, and you tried to strong-arm her. That's not a partnership. That's a conquest." Sebastian had the grace to look chagrined, but he didn't back down. "I made a business decision, Clara. I did what I thought was best for the company." "For your company," she corrected him. "Was there ever a point where you were going to treat me as a full partner in this, or am I just your most successful acquisition?" The question hung between them, ugly and undeniable. The look on his face was a complex mixture of shock, hurt, and a dawning, uncomfortable recognition. He had championed her. He had celebrated her, but he had never truly relinquished control. He had freed her from one gilded cage, only to subtly construct another around her. One of gratitude, of professional obligation, of a love that was intertwined with possession. She saw it clearly then. Her journey wasn't over. Escaping Ethan and the Hayes family was only the first step. The ultimate test was not just to gain power, but to learn how to wield it on her own terms, to stand fully in her own light without being eclipsed by the shadow of a powerful man, no matter how much she loved him. She had fought to find her voice, and she would not allow it to be ventriloquized, not even by the man who had helped her discover it. The choice was stark. She could be a queen in his empire, or she could be the sovereign of her own. Ethan's confrontation with his mother at Sunday brunch was the first tremor in what would become a seismic event for the Hayes family. His newfound clarity about their treatment of Clara acted as a lens, bringing the family's other dysfunctions into sharp, painful focus. He started noticing things he'd been conditioned to ignore, the way his mother subtly manipulated his father, the casual cruelty in his aunt's gossip, the suffocating pressure on everyone to maintain the illusion of flawless old money perfection. The real implosion began, as most Hayes family disasters did, with money. The merger that Ethan had been distracted from during the days after the gala was a crucial deal for Hayes Industries. It was a merger with a rapidly growing green energy company designed to pivot the century-old manufacturing firm toward a more sustainable and profitable future. Ethan had been leading the negotiations, but his heart wasn't in it. His mind was elsewhere, lost in a sea of regret. What he didn't know was that Sebastian Croft was also circling the same green energy company. The news broke on a Tuesday morning, sending shockwaves through the Chicago business community. Croft Ventures had made a surprise, all-cash offer for the company, an offer so aggressive and inflated that it completely obliterated the Hayes Industries proposal. It was a hostile takeover, executed with surgical precision. The board of the energy company, faced with an offer that would enrich them beyond their wildest dreams, accepted within hours. The merger wasn't just dead, it had been publicly assassinated. Ethan was in his office when his father, a man he hadn't seen truly angry in decades, stormed in, his face a mottled, furious red. "What the hell happened, Ethan?" he roared, slamming a copy of the Wall Street Journal onto his son's desk. The headline screamed, "Croft snatches green tech jewel in bold power play." I don't know," Ethan stammered. "Our offer was solid. This came out of nowhere." "Out of nowhere?" his father scoffed. "This is what happens when you lose focus. Your mother tells me you've been moping around for weeks, obsessed with that girl. Is this her? Is this some kind of revenge?" The accusation struck Ethan like a physical blow. Would Clara do this? Would she use Sebastian's power to destroy his family's legacy? The woman he had spoken to at the Art Institute seemed above such petty revenge. But the timing was too perfect, too devastating to be a coincidence. The fallout was immediate. Hayes Industries' stock plummeted. The media portrayed them as a lumbering dinosaur, outmaneuvered by a more agile and ruthless predator. The failure of the merger exposed other deeper financial weaknesses within the company, cracks that had been papered over for years by Margaret's iron-fisted control of their public image. The family gathered for an emergency meeting at the Lake Forest estate. The atmosphere was funereal. His father was grimly silent, his Aunt Carol was weeping softly, and his mother was livid. Her rage was not directed at Sebastian Croft, but at the one person she could blame, the outsider who had disrupted their perfect world. "This is all her fault," Margaret hissed, her voice trembling with fury. "That manipulative little social climber. She got her claws into that man and convinced him to ruin us. She was never anything but trouble." "Stop it, Mother," Ethan said, his voice weary. "You have no proof of that." "I don't need proof," she shrieked. "I knew from the day you brought her home she was a parasite. I tried to warn you." "You tried to break her," Ethan corrected, his own anger finally igniting. "You treated her like dirt because she wasn't from our world. You belittled her, you insulted her, you made her feel worthless. And you know what? You succeeded. She left, broken. And now she's come back strong, and you can't stand it. This isn't about the company. This is about your pride. You're angry because the woman you dismissed as insignificant is now infinitely more powerful than you are." The truth of his words hung in the opulent drawing room, sucking the air out of the space. His father looked at him, then at Margaret, a flicker of doubt in his eyes. He had always deferred to his wife in social matters, but the loss of the deal, the threat to their legacy, had shaken him to his core. The final detonation came from an unexpected source. Ethan's younger sister, who had always been a quiet observer, finally spoke up. "He's right, Mom," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "We were awful to Clara, all of us, and this mess with the company. Dad, you know we've been leveraged to the hilt for years. This deal was a Hail Mary. It's not Clara's fault the foundation was already rotten." The confession, the first crack in the family's united front of denial, shattered the remaining illusion. The argument that followed was ugly and brutal, a Pandora's box of resentments and long-buried truths flying open. Accusations were hurled, secrets were exposed. Margaret's carefully constructed image as the perfect matriarch, the unshakable leader of the Hayes clan, crumbled to dust in a matter of minutes. Ethan watched the implosion with a strange sense of detachment. He was witnessing the end of an era, the collapse of a dynasty built on a foundation of arrogance, denial, and cruelty, and he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that they had brought it all upon themselves. Clara wasn't the cause of their downfall. She was merely the mirror that had been held up to them, forcing them to finally see the ugly, decaying truth of who they had become. In the smouldering wreckage of his family's company and reputation, Ethan Hayes finally hit rock bottom. The family was fractured, communicating only through lawyers. His father was a ghost, wandering the empty halls of Hayes Industries, while his mother had retreated into a bitter, self-imposed exile, refusing to see anyone. The empire was gone, and so was the arrogance that had fueled it. For the first time in his life, Ethan was truly alone with his failures. He spent weeks sifting through the debris of his past, replaying memories, not just of Clara, but of his entire life. He saw a man who had glided through the world on a wave of privilege, a man who had never been challenged, who had never known true adversity, and who had never, ever been forced to take a hard look at himself. The man he saw in the mirror now was a stranger, humbled, broken, and filled with a profound, aching regret. He knew he had to see Clara one last time, not to beg for her back, not to ask for forgiveness he hadn't earned, but simply to say the words he should have said years ago. It wasn't about absolution for him, it was about acknowledgement for her. He didn't go through her assistant this time. Through a contact, he found out about a small, independent gallery she was supporting, the very one that had caused the rift between her and Sebastian. He went there on a rainy Thursday afternoon, knowing she often visited to mentor the young artists. He found her in a quiet corner, speaking with a young painter, her expression one of genuine warmth and encouragement. She was dressed down in jeans and a simple cashmere sweater, yet she seemed more luminous than she had in her gala gown. When she saw him, her smile didn't vanish, but it became guarded. She politely excused herself from the artist and walked toward him. "Ethan," she said, her voice neutral, "this is a surprise." "I know," he said, his hands shoved into the pockets of his coat. He felt like an awkward teenager. I needed to say something. In person." They stood in silence for a moment, surrounded by vibrant, challenging art. "The deal," he began, his voice raspy. "With the Green Energy Company. Was that you?" Clara looked him directly in the eye. "Sebastian acted on his own," she said, her voice clear and steady. "He saw a business opportunity and he took it. When I found out you were the competing offer, I tried to stop him. We had the biggest fight of our relationship over it. I told him I wouldn't be a weapon in his corporate arsenal, and I wouldn't have my past used as a tool for his ambition." She paused. "I'm no longer with Croft Ventures, Ethan, and I'm no longer with Sebastian." The confession stunned him into silence. She had walked away from it all. The power, the money, the man who had helped her rebuild her life. She had chosen herself. "This gallery," she continued, gesturing to the art around them, "this is my first project on my own. I'm using my own money to fund it, the money you gave me when I left. I'm investing it in people I believe in. It's not an empire, but it's mine." He was speechless. The narrative he had constructed of her as a vengeful goddess crumbled, replaced by an image of a woman of unshakable integrity. "That's not why I came," he finally said, finding his voice. "I came to apologize, and not the way I did before. I've been doing a lot of thinking about us, about my family, about that Christmas with the vacuum cleaner." He saw a flicker of the old pain in her eyes, and it spurred him on. "We were cruel to you," he said, the words raw and honest. "We didn't see you, Clara. I didn't see you. I was a coward. I was so afraid of disappointing my parents, of rocking the boat, that I stood by and watched them slowly erase you. I let them do it. I chose them over you, every single time. There is no excuse for it. And I am so sorry for the pain I caused you. I'm sorry for the man I was. I'm sorry I wasn't the man you deserved." Tears welled in his eyes, hot and shameful, but he didn't wipe them away. He let her see his brokenness, his complete and utter remorse. Clara watched him, her expression unreadable. For a long moment she said nothing. The only sound was the gentle patter of rain against the gallery windows. Finally, she took a deep breath. "Thank you, Ethan," she said, and her voice was soft, laced with a complex mix of past sorrow and present peace. That means more than you know. It's the one thing I think I always needed to hear." She didn't say, "I forgive you." She didn't have to. The air between them had shifted. The heavy weight of years of unspoken pain had lifted, replaced by a clean, quiet stillness. "What will you do now?" she asked. "I don't know," he answered honestly. "Try to build something real, I guess. Something of my own, something I can be proud of." She gave him a small, sad smile. It was a smile of closure, of two people who had shared a life, who had hurt each other deeply, and who could now finally, truly, let each other go. His redemption wasn't in getting her back. It was in the painful, necessary act of becoming a man worthy of her memory, a man who could finally understand the value of everything he had lost. The months that followed were a study in quiet reconstruction. For Clara, breaking away from Sebastian was a painful but necessary amputation. She had loved him, and a part of her always would, for he had been the catalyst for her transformation. But she recognized that their relationship, born from a power imbalance, could never be one of true equals. His desire to protect her had morphed into a desire to possess her, and she had fought too hard for her freedom to hand it over to anyone, no matter how benevolent the warden. She poured all her energy and the settlement from her divorce into her new venture, the Stevens Foundation for the Arts. It wasn't as glamorous as Croft Ventures, but it was wholly hers. Her mission was to find the artists who existed in the margins, the ones overlooked by the big galleries and corporate collectors. She traveled, not to Paris and London, but to Detroit, to New Orleans, to small towns in the Southwest, searching for raw, authentic talent. She wasn't just investing money, she was investing belief. She became a mentor, a champion, a force for change in a world that had once deemed her invisible. She found her purpose not in acquiring masterpieces, but in nurturing the masters of tomorrow. Her life was her own, her future a blank canvas, and for the first time she was the only artist with a brush in her hand. For Ethan, the path was steeper and far less certain. The collapse of Hayes Industries was absolute. He and his father were forced to sell off the company's assets piece by piece to cover the mountains of debt. The Lake Forest estate was sold, the glittering facade of their dynasty dismantled. What was left was a modest, manageable sum, enough to live on, but not enough to reclaim their former glory. The loss of wealth, however, was secondary to the loss of identity. Without the Hayes name to define him, Ethan was forced to figure out who he actually was. He started small. He took a business course at a local university, sitting alongside students half his age. It was humbling. He got a job, not as a CEO, but as a consultant for a small, struggling non-profit that helped ex-convicts find employment. It was difficult, often frustrating work, but it was real. He was helping people build new foundations, just as he was trying to build his own. He saw his father occasionally. The anger between them had faded, replaced by a shared, quiet grief for what they had lost, and a tentative hope for what they might rebuild, not a company, but a relationship. His mother remained distant, unable to forgive the world for her fall from grace. Ethan mourned the mother he wished he'd had, but he accepted the one he did. About a year after their last meeting, he was walking through Pilsen on a crisp autumn day and found himself outside Galleria Sombra. The name hadn't been changed. A vibrant mural decorated its exterior wall, and the sound of music and laughter spilled out onto the street. On a plaque near the door it read, "Supported by the Stevens Foundation." He smiled, a genuine, unburdened smile. He didn't go in. He knew it wasn't his place. That world belonged to her. He felt a profound sense of peace, a quiet gratitude for the woman who had, by leaving him, inadvertently saved him from the hollow man he was destined to become. Their paths would likely never cross in a meaningful way again. Their story was over. but in the quiet, unwritten chapters of their separate futures, they carried the lessons of their shared past. Clara found her power not in the arms of a billionaire, but in the strength of her own convictions. And Ethan, stripped of his name and his fortune, began the slow, arduous journey of finding his own worth, not in a balance sheet, but in the quiet dignity of a life rebuilt on a foundation of honesty and humility. The ending wasn't a fairy tale reconciliation. It was something far more real and resonant, a future unwritten, holding the quiet promise of redemption. From the ashes of a forgotten past, a woman's incredible journey of self-discovery proves that the greatest power isn't wealth or revenge, but the courage to reclaim your own story. Clara and Ethan's story is a raw and emotional look at betrayal, the silent struggles we endure, and the difficult path to redemption. It reminds us that sometimes you have to lose everything to find out who you truly are. If their powerful transformation moved you, don't forget to hit the like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear this message, and subscribe for more stories that touch the heart and stir the soul. What did you think of Clara's ultimate choice? Let us know in the comments below.